Hello and welcome to the Racers HQ podcast. I'm your host, Matt Murphy, and joining us on the line tonight is our dedicated co-host, Pat Mulry. Pat, what are you drinking tonight?
This is actually the same bottle I was drinking from last week, the Still Austin Blue Corn Bourbon. I'm still a big fan.
Okay, great.
And if Still Austin would like to come on board as a sponsor, we're all for it.
I know they're listening. Like, who's not?
Right.
Very good. And what's your favorite tasting note about that product, Mr. Mulry?
It's the kind of caramely notes. It's not sweet, but has a caramely note that I really like.
Like a Werther's original.
Also, yeah, sort of. See, that gets right into that's just right into the wheelhouse for our very special guest tonight.
Guys, we have a very special guest tonight. We have Jay Lamm, the inventor of crap can endurance racing, the 24 Hours of Lemons. We're going to get into all of that. We're so excited to have him on the line tonight. But Jay, just real quick, how you doing, boss?
I'm doing well, but if I had known that Mulry was having a cocktail, I would have gone and poured one. I feel I've been
tried
misled.
to insist.
Yeah. Sorry we didn't give you the memo before that.
Oh well.
I'll fall on that sword.
I'll survive.
I hope so. I hope so.
Jay, we could vamp here for 5 minutes if you want to trickle downstairs or trickle back upstairs. We're going to be talking garage updates.
That's a great idea. You guys talk garage updates. Try to finish just the amount of time it takes me to go get a bourbon.
All right. I don't want to see you on the camera then, Jay. Get out of here. All right, Mulry.
Now we can talk.
Garage updates.
Now we can talk about Jay behind his back.
Uh-oh.
So garage updates on Miku. As I just texted our August group, it has been 8 years since the original Miku chassis darkened the doorway of Harp HQ, and so we that's fun. But mostly the updates at this point in the garage. We got some more. Ben was able to come over on Sunday, so we got some more of the electrical stuff kind of knocked out. And I think, in fact, that's almost all, if not completely all, finished up now. And got to painting the final, what will be the final color coat on the car. So I've got 2 coats of that on with the good old sponge roller method.
Nice.
So, it looks... what is it they say, 50 at 50 or whatever it is? I don't even really know what that means. 50% okay at 50 miles an hour?
Yeah, that sounds good.
We'll go with that. And I'm sure there's like an SCCA committee about that somewhere, but I don't know what it is.
Or like 50 yards and 50 miles an hour. Yeah.
Oh, maybe that's what it is. Yeah. And so yeah, got that going. It's a good color. You can still see roller lines in it, but that'll probably, stay true to the end because it's at the end of the day, it's still a Lemon's car. But I'm looking forward to it. I've got the vinyls all designed and out for bid right now, so those will come back and probably get those done, I'd guess, after Christmas. And then I'm shooting for early to mid January, depending on weather and availability, to get up to ECR and do a shakedown before Barber. So
nice.
We are, like Ben said when we were out there on Sunday, he was like, like this looks like it might actually happen. So
yeah, no, very impressive pace on the build, man. So
thank you.
I'm excited.
It's all, it's always it feels like it takes forever to kind of crest the hill, and then once you do, the going down the other side's a lot easier, but it feels like it takes forever to get there. So
yeah.
Anyway, that's it for me. How about Miata Garage up in OKC?
Yeah, a few quick updates. Let's see. I'm mulling over whether to spend money on my old DeWalt wireless or cordless set, or go all in on my Cobalt brushless set. So I think I am going to jettison my DeWalt stuff and standardize. I need a new drill apparently, but we got this figured out. So that's the thing on my mind. So standardizing on cordless sets. I bought a Raspberry Pi 4 to upgrade the dashboard in my Miata. So we're running that. What is it called?
Race Capture Pro.
Race Capture Pro. Thank you. We're running Race Capture Pro to that Raspberry Pi dashboard, and I think the new version is too hefty for my Raspberry Pi 3. So that's in the mail. Yeah, not a lot going on. Still building out that dashboard. Oh, and I needed to develop a throttle stop so I can reduce the amount of power on my car by like 5% so I can get into ST5 rules. And sure enough, there's a little bolt on the Miata like pedal set that I can just move in and out, and it stops the throttle pedal. And I think that's going to be the answer. So, built-in technology. Thank you, Miata. Also, be a fun
and infinitely variable.
Yeah. It'd be a good prank to play on somebody, though, right? Like, just sneak into their Miata and just crank that thing down, and they've got like 30 horsepower at that point. Anyway,
Yeah.
Something to do in
then
the pits.
They fail dyno, and you can mad scientists laugh them all the way to Tulsa.
Yeah, can't wait. Anyway, enough about me. Jay, it looks like you got yourself a drink. What'd you get?
Yeah, no, I'm ready.
I like it. I like it.
What flavored juice are you drinking, Jay?
It's not a Balvenie, it's the Balvenie. And not always one of my faves, but I figured I was in a hurry, so it was just the first thing that fell to hand, and not terrible.
I love it. Is
It's
it a
iced
double wood?
package, so how bad could it be?
Yeah, that's true. I opened a bottle of the Lafroig Nick Offerman edition.
Ooh.
And it smells really interesting, and the flavor is very interesting, but I was able to consume about 2 sips of it before, all of the yardy smokiness overwhelmed me.
Yeah.
Next time I'm in town, I got to try that Mulry. I'm always intrigued by a Lafroig, but I don't want to do a whole lot of it. Nobody asked, but guys, I'm drinking Tastes Like Chicken out of a ball glass. Tastes Like Chicken is the world's #1 vodka brand. And washing it down with lemon lime Waterloo. So, real classy over here in Oklahoma City.
Where is Taste Like Chicken distilled?
I think it's in
Guangzhou?
Austin. I think it's Austin.
Oh, okay.
I think the tagline is most things taste like chicken. This doesn't. It's like not tasting like chicken is pretty baseline requirements for vodka. But anyway, all right. I'll find out where Tastes Like Chickens is distilled. But Mulry, you have a series of very important questions to ask our guests. So why don't you just kick off a real podcast here?
I do. So we will we'll introduce, I'm sure, to nearly all, if not all of our listeners, the name of Jay Lamm is renowned for the democratization of endurance automotive racing, and also besmirching automotive endurance auto racing all in one fell swoop. But Jay is of course are you still officially the Grand Poobah? Is that still on your business cards?
No, it's always been chief perpetrator.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, you're confusing
my
me.
phone, it's always been Grand Poobah.
Yeah, you're confusing me with the Elks Lodge.
that must happen to you all the time.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah.
So Jay is the chief perp of the 24 Hours of Lemon series, among other sundry business enterprises that he has wheeling about, sort of like Mr. Burnsian fashion.
Oh God! If only
steeples his fingers in front of his chin.
Mm-hmm.
God, if only. He's my hero.
I've known Jay. Jay may not remember this, but I've known him since my first race in February 2009 at Houston, when that was actually Jay's birthday weekend, and it was celebrated with a piñata full of
airline bottles. Yeah,
that's right, airline liquor bottles.
Yeah,
party.
Which was a lot of fun to see the kids scrambling after that, right? Like,
with their tiny fingers.
that was one of the times I realized, huh, we might need a motorsports lawyer. So
Yeah, at that point, I don't think you even knew yet that I was a law talking guy, and so we've known each other 10 years now, I guess, almost, or
yeah,
16 going
yeah,
on.
something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, Jay, I want to start with as I mirror your pose here unintentionally. Uh, there we go. Now we're all hands on our heads. Um, how did you get into? Obviously, lemons is not your first foray, but where some of us ran into you first was in your automotive writing uh, dealings. How did you get into being an auto writer?
It was easier than working at Taco Bell is the short answer. When I was a young teenage guy, in my family, as soon as you could legally work, you were expected to go out and get a job, and I'm the youngest of 3 guys, and I watched my poor, dumb, less imaginative, albeit sweet, brothers go and work at Taco Bell and the Burger Barn and horrible jobs like that, and I was simultaneously watching my father write about cars at the time. And it was just very obvious that was a much better way to make a dollar. It was a lot less work for a lot more money. So at 15 and a half, I said, well, how hard can that be? I mean, my dad's doing it. Clearly, it can't be that hard. And I started selling articles to Auto Week, who I don't think knew that I didn't actually have a driver's license yet, and
Hmm.
that was my 16-year-old high school job. And it's one of those jobs. This was back in the 80s when you could still actually make a living doing it, which hasn't been true for 20 years. That was back at a time when it was too much fun and too much money to ever go out and get a real job after that. So I basically have been shiftless ever since.
So you were ruined straight out of the crib, basically.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. And so I went from just writing articles and shooting articles. After doing that into my early 20s, I had an undergraduate degree to finish, and I said, "Well, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life." So I quit and I went back to school and finished school. And when I got out, by complete dumb, useless luck, I got hired out of the blue as the editor of Sports Car International, and I've been
Hmm.
stuck ever since. So my one attempt to get out of the industry was a gross failure, and so I wound up editing a bunch of magazines on top of Sports Car. Wound up leaving that, starting a publishing business that put out a lot of magazines. Blah blah blah. Here we are.
So, as a writer and I suppose as an editor, what was apart from the nonstop cocktail shrimp buffets? What was your favorite part of the writing gig?
You know, the nonstop cocktail shrimp buffets, let me speak to that for a second. That's fun for about a year and a half. And then you realize, wait a minute, there's this whole other world out there in which if guys want cocktails and shrimp, they go get a better job so they can buy them themselves. And, once you've had that revelation, it's a little hard to go back and appreciate the cocktails and shrimp. In fact, pretty soon you're sitting around in a nice hotel in, a nice town in France eating cocktails and shrimp, and you're looking at like, why am I sitting next to these idiots? Like, why don't I go out and get a real job and then I can just go to whatever hotel I want? So the actual part that I enjoyed, I learned much to my surprise. I enjoyed running the projects. I enjoyed running the projects of being an editor, ultimately running the projects of being a publisher. The car part, I mean, cars are great. Cars are fun. I've always had cars and played with cars and fixed cars, but any idiot can do that. You can work in the insurance business and do that.
Right.
So to me, it was much more about how do you form a staff? How do you run a staff? How do you make a plan to get the product out the door? How do you make sure that actually happens? That kind of problem solving is really way more fun and continues to be way more fun than writing about cars. Let's be clear. Nothing interesting has happened in cars in the last 50 years, with possible exception of Tesla. So, that gets old pretty fast. Whether you're writing about the new color on the WRX this year, nobody cares. Nobody who's not reading that stuff cares. What's much more important is how do things actually get done in this world?
Hmm.
So you actually that's interesting. I would never have expected that the car writing and publishing business would actually prepare you for a career in real business.
Yeah, well, I mean, I seem to be the exception.
Yeah, having
Oh,
met through you and through Lemons, many others, I would agree with that.
Jay,
I
what?
think a lot of car writers actually still really are fascinated by the car, which,
Yeah.
probably hamstrings you a little bit from the bigger picture.
Jay, you mentioned starting a publishing company. Like, what were some of those publications?
Oh God, yeah. Well, now I regret bringing it up. So I realized in the late '90s that all of the captive titles meaning if it used to be if you were Ford, you had the Ford Owners Magazine. That was a captive title. You would put out
Hmm.
this magazine because there was no website, there was no nothing else. Magazines is how you did that kind of outreach. And in the '90s, those were already getting shut down, rolled up. It's very expensive to put out a periodical,
Hmm.
and particularly if you're Ford and you're only putting out, let's say, 6 issues a month, but you've got to have an art director, an assistant art director, an editor, a managing editor. It's this huge staff to do that kind of stuff. I realized about that time, well, most of the time those people are going to France and eating shrimp. They're not actually producing anything useful. So wouldn't it make a lot more sense to create one staff that was then doing all of those things for those other companies
Right.
as clients? That was a great idea. And had I had it 15 years earlier, it would have been the right idea. But of course, when I had it was just when a lot of clubs and car manufacturers were starting to realize, well, not only do we not need to have our own magazine staff, we don't need a magazine at all. There's this thing called the internet. So pretty soon that we got into the very tail end of print. So we had customers such as the Miata Club was a customer.
Hmm.
We did a Corvette magazine. We did my personal favorite, the PT Cruiser Quarterly. We did
Nice.
that. And that was about the point where that client came along. That was about the point where I realized, this idea, little late. Probably we need to get back out of this because this is not solving the life problems I was hoping to solve. So yeah, those are really our journalistic triumph was the PT Cruiser Quarterly. I like to say.
Was there an HHR biweekly?
Well, yeah, we were afraid that was going to be the big competitor. Yeah, it was going to be like the racing form for yeah for the HHR. So no, I mean we knew literally. This is a completely true. I knew it was really urgent that we come up with a new line of business when the client for this PT Cruiser thing said, "Hey, I got this new contributor I want you to use." Blah blah blah. Here's his phone number. Call him up. And Nick, who we worked together for decades, calls the guy up and it's on speakerphone and I'm listening to it. And the guy's phone rings, says, "Hi, this is his name. For Star Wars collectibles, press 1. For PT Cruiser performance parts, press 2." We're just like, oh,
Nice.
like we got to not do this anymore.
We're in second place to the Star Wars collectibles. That's the magazine that we need to be running.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, economically, I understand that, but that's just not the life you want to lead, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So, what was in all of your travels aside from travels to France for cocktail shrimp? What was the uh, most extravagant place you got to go and drive cars on some manufacturer's dime, and the worst?
Well, the worst was the Pontiac corn dog tent at the Indianapolis airport parking lot. That was
Nice.
where they launched. I think it was the G3 or something like that. And I was like, like, just like send me the car. Just let me go to a dealership. Like I don't need to do this. Um, I don't know. The best it's that you get to go do some pretty spectacular stuff. And so I was running sports car. I did a while where I was stringing for Car and Driver and MPH and some of those things. And so you get some good stuff. I did a great when the 1994 maybe they introduced a new E class with the suspiciously Jaguar S class front end. When they introduced that thing, that was a 7-day tour of Europe that was every night they were driving into some other fancy Baden this or spa that. That was pretty good. Um, Although we did, because they were German, they had this very early computer driven logistics program where every rider was going to get in every car and you'd swap keys at a certain point, and they had little scanner, little UPC codes on a
Oh,
key fob. And being the Americans, of course, we realized with by day two, if you just stopped before the official stop and everybody switched keys, so the fobs didn't line up with the cars and who they thought they were, the Germans lost their. They just could not handle it. That was pretty fun. What else did we do? I did a trip for Brutus magazine in Japan. That was another week-long deal. The premise was they got two American auto journalists, me and Winston Goodfellow, took us to Japan and exposed us to the wackadoo Japanese car culture. A different thing
Mhm.
every day. There was the K car day. There was the Bosuzuku day. I mean, it was fantastic. Um, so we did, we did some good stuff. But again, as I said, the fact of the matter is, if that's the life you want to lead, then just go get a real job like anybody else. I think the passion for the auto journalist fantasy swag is it's a failure of imagination, is what it is. And
Mhm.
and if that's the only way you can imagine that you can have those experiences, you're just not imagining very hard. So I have relatively little patience for that aspect of the business.
is the to the extent you know, but I suspect that you do, knowing you, has that level of kind of swag and travel really fallen off in the last 5 or 10 years, or
I
has it
have
come
I
back
have
since like COVID?
I mean, I have no idea. I've been since the, I don't know, 2016, 2017, maybe. I've been entirely separate from that world professionally. I mean, I still know all those guys, and we're still friends
Right.
and all that, but I haven't done any of that kind of work since then. In fact, I have in my old office in Emeryville. After I had been asked by Eddie Alterman, who is great, and he was the last guy that I would do stuff for because I just love Eddie so much. He had asked me to do. It was some trip to Japan for an Evo or something like that, and that was all well and good, but I got all behind on the other business stuff that I was working on, and when you got right down to it, it was not a terribly interesting car. I mean, it was no different than it was a year ago, and I didn't really realize I didn't really have anything to say about it. And I wrote myself a little contract that I pinned to my bulletin board that said, "I, Jay Lamm, will never, ever, ever, ever agree to write another car magazine article as long as I live. Signed, Jay Lamm." So I've been out of it. I mean, I have been stone cold out of it since then. So I have no idea.
So, I think I've told you this before, but if not, it was Ultraman's article in New York Times in September 2008 about the Detroitish
Hmm.
race. That's what got me into lemons, right? I remember reading it.
Got a lot of people in 11.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Alterman's piece, and before that was the car and driver piece from Altamont, 2006. I think Tony Swan maybe wrote it. Um, and those things, that was still back in a time when that earned print media was hugely important. I mean, that's where
Yeah,
a lot of people were still getting a lot of information. Not so much anymore, but back then it really mattered.
yeah. I read that. I read the first paragraph of that article. My brother was in North Carolina. Of course, I was in Dallas by that point, and my brother was in North Carolina. I think in either in business school or just out of. And I called him up on the phone and I said, "Look, we've got to do this. We've got to do this now because somebody's going to outlaw this any minute, and we need to do this once before it goes away." And so, thank God that hasn't happened, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We're always right around the corner from that, right?
Yeah.
Um, so, how did you transition from? You discussed a little bit, but like, what was the transition like going from writing to publishing
Well,
and forming that?
As I said, I discovered pretty early on, and by falling ass backward into that editorship of Sports Car International in the '90s, um, which that was such a small magazine. One of the great things about that magazine, I look back on that and I think we put out a really good magazine. And one of the great things about that magazine in that period was it was two guys. It was me and Henry Rasmussen. He was the art director, and that was it. And the guy who owned the title, who was also the publisher of the title, he wasn't paying attention. He didn't care. So you really and I didn't appreciate it at the time because I'd never been on a staff before. I mean, that's the only time I've ever worked for anybody else as an employee in my entire life. The 3.5 years of that job. Um, I didn't appreciate we were told here's a budget. It's not huge, but it's sufficient. Here's a great print house. Go make a good magazine. And so we had to solve all of these problems that normally the editor does not need to solve, related to staffing and layout and content and all of these things that usually there's a million fingers in the pie. It was really just the two of us, and Henry had a lot of experience and was able to teach me a lot of things. Um, and I think there it became clear to me, and well, in retrospect, it became very clear to me that that process of take nothing and build something out of it was much more interesting than the new metallic flake paint color for the 1LE Camaro. I mean, there just wasn't that much interest happening in that world. It was all incremental, whereas I was learning really new and really interesting stuff about how you make something out of nothing. So the transition was completely accidental. I had no idea that that's what I was learning, but pretty quickly, um, I realized I was much more interested in those kinds of problems to solve than actually writing the content. Now, as it was, our budget was such I still had to write about half the content, but by then I'd been doing it for so long, 10 years of my life probably. It it was sort of second nature, and so of the masthead, let's say we had 20 regular contributors. Well, 10 of them were me. And the other 10 I pretty heavily rewrote, and our staff was pretty much limited to those contributors who could deliver on time and to length and did not mind getting heavily rewritten. Which those three requirements
Yeah.
eliminates about 80% of the journalism field. So
Yeah.
we figured out how to get a good crew in there, how to get that machine cranking pretty smoothly. And I think we learned pretty quickly how to put out a really good magazine with kind of nothing. And that was much more gratifying. And so everything that followed from that really was about how do you make something out of absolutely nothing. And lemons is a good example of that.
Yeah.
Um, as opposed to what's the new paint color of the 1LE Camaro.
Yeah. So that's a good a good transition there. Was um maybe talk a little bit about I know you and I've talked about it a lot, but that transition of how Lemons came to be at the fateful meeting, the fateful luncheon at which Lemons got posited as an idea. And did you see it at all at that point as a real thing, or was it was just really a lark?
No, it was absolutely a lark. And at that point, now we're talking 2005-ish. Let's say. At that point, I had started and was kind of simultaneously running a couple of different businesses, and I really was never thinking that events or motor racing was going to be part of that at all. In fact, I was getting further and further away from cars. Um, and the the pertinent piece of the first Lemons race. So Martin Swig, an old friend and mentor, he was a very smart, very charismatic entrepreneurial guy. Car dealerships and software company, and he just would would figure out interesting angles on all kinds of different things. And for some reason, Martin decided that he would take me under his wing a little bit and kind of let me watch him do what he did. And he had he and I together had done this 500-mile $500 car rally. He was putting on the California Melee at the time, and called the Double 500, and we did that for some number of years together. I always I always said the fun thing about this is going to be these $500 cars. They're all going to blow up on the road. You're going to have great stories to tell because you had to fix your car in the middle of nowhere using acorns and a rock on the side of the road. And the goddamn cars weren't breaking. They just the $500 cars that we could all find. They were just too good. They weren't breaking down. And so I suggested to Martin, well, let's move this thing to the racetrack because then we're sure to break them there. And Martin said, "Yeah, I don't want any part of that." Um, and it wasn't until I came up with the name, the 24 Hours of Lemons pun, that I got serious enough to just do it myself. And so, Martin was quite generous as always with, "Hey, if this were my thing, I would do that. I wouldn't do that." I mean, he was a great teacher, but at that point, he wanted nothing to do with racetracks. So I decided, well, I'll just do it. I'll do it as a lark. It'll be a one-time thing. It'll be so horrible that nobody's ever going to want to do it again. So I just went out and found a racetrack to rent, and that was it. There's no intention that it's going to be a business. And to this day, I look back at the things I had started before that, the things that I've started since then or been involved with since then. And this stupid little racing series it continues to be the most enjoyable, the easiest to run. That it grew itself out of nothing. Um, and of all the other things and there was no business plan, there was no intention for it to be a business. All the other things that I business planned the hell out of and clinicked and A/B, and none of that stuff's been nearly as simple as fun. So I just clearly am not as smart as I think I am. But the lemons thing, you got really lucky. I mean, it was in retrospect, it was the right place at the right time, the right idea. And there was this huge well of people who wanted to have that experience and just did not want to deal with the pelote wearing man child who was kind of had captured that activity. They just didn't want to be that guy. But I mean, no, I didn't know that. Nobody knew that. It was just dumb luck.
Yeah,
You have
serendipity
pelotes,
a
right,
lot.
Pat?
Say that. Say what?
You have pelotes, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a whole closet of them.
Yeah.
I need an extra closet. Um, yeah, I've thought a lot about, and probably talked about it, the role of serendipity in this whole enterprise, right? Because kind of as it takes off is right as I mean, it's amazing in some ways that when it takes off is in the lee of the financial collapse, right? Like we're in this terrible economic
Yeah.
position in the
Yeah.
U.S.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it kind of opened up availability for you at tracks that otherwise might have been difficult to get into
Yeah.
because now DEs weren't what they are now. They weren't the same then, but they
Yeah.
did exist. And then suddenly, those disappear because their clientele, has lost all their money in their 401ks,
Yeah.
and you can pick up dates on the cheap to run a series that otherwise tracks might be like, what is
Yeah.
this? I don't want anything to do with this. Instead, it's like, well, will their check clear or does it have the possibility of clearing?
No, that's 100% correct. And so many things about this were just ludicrously fortuitous. That being a big one, and of course, now we're in an environment that's just the opposite, where
Right.
there's a much higher supply of people wanting dates than tracks to give dates. And certainly in the first 5 years of Lemons, it was exactly the opposite. And yeah, you know what? Our checks always cleared and we paid them on time. And suddenly, within a couple of years, we were heroes. I mean, you were getting these racetracks that had slot car sets that, built to mimic them that we all grew up with, calling up on the phone and saying, "Hey, will you bring your goddamn gremlins here? Because, we got 15 summer dates that we're trying to fill." That's not the case anymore. But yeah, and the other thing that we saw, because we were just starting to realize, well, we got to make more dates and we got to put, people want to do this thing. And if you're in Pennsylvania, you're not going to drive to Altamont, California. So we got to go to the
Right.
East Coast. Um, that was happening just as the collapse was really hitting its rock bottom. Um, and what we saw was this elasticity in that group of people who wanted to do this, where the fantasy guys from 2006 and into 2007 who would never have been quote real racers, they kind of dropped off the bottom as as the economy got worse and worse. But it was backfilled by all of these, Trans Am guys, these people who had been doing $200,000 a year
Mm,
programs. They still wanted a race, but they didn't have $200,000 a year anymore.
Mm.
So this world of crap can endurance has been weirdly insulated from those shocks. Obviously, COVID's an exception, but from economic
right.
shocks, you lose some on the bottom as everybody becomes straightened. You lose some on the bottom, but you backfill some of it on the top. The backfilling from the top is problematic because a lot of pelote wearing man children, which is no fun, and you got to kick them out. But at least there's people there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating to think back on, in 2006, if you wanted to go endurance, if you were a normal human, not otherwise involved in auto racing as a business, and were not, an heir to an
Yeah,
unbelievable business fortune. If you wanted to go endurance racing, there was none or
yeah.
almost none. Right? I mean, was the 25 hours at Thunderhill a thing at that point?
5 hours existed, and it was really wildly successful because there
Yeah.
was no other place. And that basic math of track time versus investment still held true. And in retrospect, it's really not a complimentary statement about the auto racing industry, particularly in this country, that nobody who was really a professional in auto racing figured that out sooner, because it's kind of glaringly obvious in retrospect. Like, really, people want to just get a lot of racing time for the dollar they spend, and the obvious way to do that is an endurance race. Kind of duh, but it's very easy to see that in retrospect. God knows it never occurred to me. I mean, not in a million years did that occur to me. It was a funny pun. This entire thing was based on a stupid pun.
It's like a Peter Sellers movie, really.
Yeah, 100%. It really is. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Because it's incredible. We go from there's virtually no amateur endurance racing in America in 2006. Let's say you have a couple of badonkadonk races at Altamont, and then you do what, four races the first year that you do more than one. Is that right?
Think that's right, and then maybe 9, and then maybe 12, and then maybe 20. It turned out, and to go back to Eddie Alterman and Tony Swan and those guys in those first races, those first couple of races, it turned out that because that's what I was doing for a living, or one of the things I was doing for a living at that point was still being in car magazines. All my friends were in car magazines. So that first
Right.
race, I just invited my friends who I knew were car people, and they were all car magazine guys, utterly by coincidence. And that, they all went out and to either justify taking time off of work, or maybe to, try to write their Oldsmobile Aurora off their personal income taxes. They all wrote these feature articles about it. And that earned media got so much traction so quickly that it was very clear. I mean, the phone literally ringing as soon as you put the receiver down when that first car and driver article came out. I started getting calls, and you put the receiver down, and the phone would ring again. It's like, when are you coming to fill in the blank? So it
Mm.
was pretty clear that there was something there, and it was pretty clear simultaneously that publishing magazines for the PT Cruiser Club was not a long-standing industry. That was not something that we were all going to ride into retirement. And I had employees and payroll to meet, so you pursue it. And the obvious thing, when you've got that, and now you know how to do one, so it's pretty easy to figure out how to do 4 or 9 or 12 or 20, relatively easy. The obvious thing is, okay, well, let's just figure out how to make this thing replicable on the back end, as close to a rubber stamp on the back end as you can, so that you can afford to go around and do it 20 times around the country. Um, that was a no brainer. So within 3 years, it was pretty clear. the country had a capacity for maybe a couple dozen lemons races, and you just get there, and you realize pretty quickly once you overshoot that by 2 or 3 races, you're like, okay, well, that was the capacity, and now we've got more than the capacity, and let's not do that, or else we're going to go broke and we can't do it anymore. So it settled out pretty quickly to
Mm.
what is the size that it wants to be.
What is the you've been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't mean to ask the question of who is your favorite child, right? But if you think back about all the races that you have attended, as an aside, do you even know how many races you've attended?
Me personally, no,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
200 and something. It's a lot. The last few years, I have not attended very many races. I very consciously made the decision. I mean, I used to go to basically every race, and that
right.
means you're on an airplane every other weekend. And I just can't. I just couldn't do that anymore. Um, so up until the last few years, you could probably just look at how many races did we do and take 10% away, and that would be a good number. But now I probably go to 4 or 5 a year. It's going
Right.
to be 230, something like that.
That's
And
amazing.
I think the question you were leading to is what are your favorites? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that is a hard one. That is a hard one to do. It's honestly less the track. It is very often the track management, but we're privileged because if track management is problematic, you just don't go back. I mean, like
Right.
we don't need the market share in Pennsylvania enough to put up with a douchebag. And I say Pennsylvania, I don't mean anything about Pennsylvania. I mean the only tracks we've used in Pennsylvania are great. So don't draw anything out of that. It's just an example. But um, uh,
We still love you, Pit Race.
yeah, yeah, no, pit race is great. Actually, they're sort of at the top of the list of easy to deal with, and they know what they're doing. You'd be shocked at how few tracks actually know what they're doing, but that's a separate story. Um, I think the what's more interesting is that there's this huge variability. You could go to CMP, which we have gone to once or twice or 3 times a year for 15 years. And one race will just be great. It'll be fun and you'll have a good time and everything operationally will be super smooth and there won't be any heartburn and there's no red flag and you're, not biting your nails and everything is just so fun and at the end of the weekend you're so happy and then for no reason at all, that same event a year later can just be a complete nail biting, frustrating cluster F. Um, so it's hard to just say, oh, yeah, every race at X has been great and that's my favorite.
Right.
It just kind of doesn't work that way. It's weirdly random. Obviously, I love races at Sonoma, but that's because I can sleep in my own bed every night. Um, other than that, they're all largely the same in a way. There are some places, I think Autobahn is a good example. Um, there are some places where the track and facility staff they're so fun, they're so organized, they just get it that at least when you show up, it's going to be good. You just don't have to
Right.
worry about certain things, and that's always a relief. But um, for the most part, it's pretty randomly distributed.
So I guess then the flip side of that, what makes for um, a lousy weekend at the races for you?
Obviously, if there's an
If you're calling your
incident,
lawyer in the middle of the race on Saturday?
yeah, yeah, and as my lawyer, as you know, I mean, I don't think that ever happened, but it can. And so, if there's 2 red flags in a day, every time there's a red
Yeah.
flag, I mean, we've been doing this for
Yeah, and you
18
mean a
years.
literal red flag, not a metaphorical red flag.
Yeah, no, I mean a literal red flag. So we've been doing this for 18 years, and every time there's a red flag, as the organizer, you immediately think like, "Oh my god, is this it? Like, is this
Mhm.
something really bad?" And thank God, so far, it just hasn't been. But you never get
Mhm.
out of the habit of thinking that. And there are some events where you can have 5 red flags over the course of the weekend. And even
Yeah.
though none of them wind up amounting to much, or they
Yeah.
rarely wind up amounting to anything, but um, that stress and anxiety and alarm, that's just no fun. I mean, that is
Yeah.
absolutely no fun at all for anybody. So, that's the definition of not a good event. Obviously, weather can be a big factor, but sometimes the most entertaining races are the ones that you feel the most heroic. You've overcome this ludicrous,
Right.
hailstorm and whatever else it is, and you wind up it's midnight and you wind up at the Chateau Alon, drinking cocktails and bribing somebody to open up one of the spa rooms. Those are the best races ever, even though from the outside looking in, it's like, oh, this is horrible. So, racers, particularly endurance racers, a lo- the word endurance is in there for a reason. And a lot of the
Right.
fun is overcoming the challenges that get thrown at you. That's the whole point of endurance racing. So there is a level of that, well, I overcame it anyway, that's actually more fun. And then there's that part where now it's 3 in the morning and you've been lying on your back in the water trying to change out a differential, on a BMW E36, just to name something. And that's just not fun anymore. So it's hard to generalize.
Yeah.
I,
No,
I'd
that
ask you
that
guys. I mean, I'd ask you guys the same thing. Is there any consistency? Let's say, leaving aside the fantasy that you're going to win a race, is there any consistency to what makes a good one or a bad one?
it's
Oh,
funny. Murphy, what do you think?
overcoming hardship, right? Like hardship happens, but overcoming it, even if it's just taking the checkers on that last lap,
Right.
is uh, that's always a big one for me.
No,
What do
that's
you think?
definitely true. I mean, when we got our first heroic fix in Houston in fall of 2009, after Dad and I, round trip to Dallas to pick up another car to swap the motor in that MR2, and I think we got back out for the last 3 laps or something like that, and I don't know. You're so tired. It's hard to separate the unbelievable fatigue from the overwhelming joy at the same time, right? When the car gets very dusty because it all came together. Yeah, that's something else. I mean, in retrospect, the races that we remember are the ones where there were horrific, death-defying, uh, mostly travel stories that
Mhm.
we've made our way through, or um, the ridiculous things we remember, like the
Are you
time we
thinking
stopped at a.
Sebring?
So what?
Are you thinking Sebring?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's a bad word on
Uh,
this podcast.
that's right.
Oh,
Be careful how you say that in front of Matt Murphy. He's still working off the VIG.
Yeah.
But yeah, actually, like it was on return from Sebring the first time that we went, which was its own harrowing story of getting there, and we stopped at the. I don't know if I've ever told you this. We stopped at a gas station on the way back in Big Surprise, Alabama, and filled up the rig and go inside to get something to eat and use the facilities and all that. And as we're walking out, there's this glass display case by the exit door full of taxidermied squirrels. But it's not just taxidermied squirrels, Jay. It's taxidermied squirrels in reproduction Civil War dress. Some soldiers, I think all Confederates, go figure, and some in antebellum dress supporting the soldiers. And yeah, that was one of those moments you see that, and you're like, I really have gone through the looking glass here, haven't I? Like this is not only is this not something I ever thought I'd see, it's not something I ever had contemplated existed in reality. And
existed
I
out in
really
the
wish,
world.
yeah, I really wish I had bought one, but they were really expensive. They were like, 100 or 120 bucks. It was a lot more than I was willing to pay for a bit. Um oh my gosh. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um but I agree with Murphy. Like, overcoming adversity is great. You know, I would like to say, that the winning is also great, but I don't have a lot of experience with that. We won that Class C, and that was, it was overjoyed, and we almost won a Class B, except for one super cheaty Jeep Cherokee that never should have been in Class B that beat us out at ECR. I'm not still bitter, 10 years
Not
later.
that you're bitter. Not that you're bitter.
That's right. That's right.
I mean,
Um,
I think you've actually hit on the essence, and I wasn't even gonna bring this up earlier in the conversation because it's such a long and roundabout thing. But the whole lemons world, um, it derives in a very straight line from that overcoming problems, that overcoming hardship realization. And it all comes back to double 500 came back to this, and the transition from double 500 that I wanted to make of going out to racetrack. The whole point was to create hardship so that you could overcome it and get that sense of accomplishment. I mean, you're accomplishing something nobody ever asked you to accomplish, and the world would not have been improved, by your accomplishing it. But it is you're setting up to straw man and knock it over, and it all comes back in a very straight line. God bless good old Dick McClure. I was just texting with him right before this podcast started. In fact, my friend Dick McClure, we used
the
to
U-boat
do
commander.
the U-boat commander. We used to do California Melee and other very high-end vintage rallies like that together. And unlike everybody else in those events, Dick would show up with his '56 Volkswagen Beetle that he had literally finished or not finished. The morning that the thing is starting. The first California Melee Dick and I ever did together. We had been on different teams and different cars and some of these decided like nobody else would put up with either one of us. So we should start entering cars together. The first one I did with him was a 1956 smallmouth TR3. And when I got into it at the first morning in the Fairmont, I put my fingers on the dashboard to lower myself into the passenger seat. And of course, by the way, no top side curtains. No, we can't afford that. So
Right.
it's pissing down rain. And I left fingerprints in the paint of the towel. And Dick said, "Oh, yeah, no, it's not cured yet. Like, don't touch the body." So that's what we were dealing with. And
Out of the way.
that car, we literally on the Avenue of the Giants, day 3, had the engine fall out. I mean, that's an
Oh
expression.
gosh.
Literally had the engine fall out. Literally had the steering wheel come off in my hands. Literally got passed by the passenger side rear knockoff, which knocked itself off. Turns out there are two directions for those things. And those kinds of hardships to overcome that and get the car across the line, that is what makes it spectacular. And so double 500 and 24 hours lemons, really, they were just, the world of expensive vintage rallies had gotten pretty quickly to a point where some VC was just pulling out his check
Right.
wrench and solving the problem of how do you make a Mercedes Gullwing go 1,000 miles. When Swig started that event in America, he had been doing the Italian Melee. Started it in America. Nobody drove old cars 1,000 miles in this country. You wouldn't do it. It would never occur to you to do it. And the
Right.
reason it would never occur to you is that in 1981 or whatever that was, um, nobody knew how to make these things run. And so it was always this adventure in let's take our old car and have an adventure trying to figure out how do you make this thing run? How do you get this car home or at least to the next stop? Because you just couldn't do it. Well, now those cars will all do it all the time. Not all the time, but just about all the time. We've figured out how to make an old car survive that. So the double 500 was a way to take the check wrench out of the equation, and when that proved to be too easy, not enough people were having horrible crises to overcome, then moving it to a racetrack was just the next step.
Some could say that this is maybe a metaphor for all of life.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Especially that part where no matter how hard you try, you're always going to get beaten by some fool in a Jeep Cherokee.
Mhm.
Or something.
Or yes,
So,
or
how to kind of change gears here a little bit? How did the designated charity thing come around?
um well, it occurred to us very early on that there are few things more selfish and less socially defensible than getting a whole bunch of white dudes into a big paved area and driving a bunch of dumbass cars around in circles and caring about what happens. And it just seemed like a pretty low effort way to reduce the complete self absorption and utter lack of purpose or point to say, hey, why don't we invite some charities in here who are actually doing something good for a change, unlike us,
Right.
and let them try to use this crowd in this format, to raise some money to do something good. Um, what ultimately happened is a couple started to really stand out. Alex's Lemonade Stand under Diane DeCola, who was with the Volvo team on the East Coast for a while, and then Jill Swanson ultimately came along with
Yep.
Lemons for Love,
Mhm.
and we learned that just like trying to put on a car race without a good infrastructure and without really a very
Hmm.
clear professional idea of how you're going to do it at scale is a disaster. We learned very quickly that most nonprofits are not built to actually do the thing. I mean, they have great intentions, but they don't have a staff and they don't actually have a plan for how they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And, they don't necessarily have someone who's going to show up the day of. And so when we started encountering Diane and Jill, who really did know, they both came from business and ops backgrounds, really did know
Right.
how to say, this is what I want to do. This is the cause that I want to really make progress with. And I'm going to apply some of those very well known, well proven strategies for like show the hell up when you say you're going to show up with a staff who knows what to do. Um, it clearly was in our interest then to just say, okay, like this is your gig. Like you're going to have this race.
Right.
You just go solve the problem. So uh, we set out to have somebody there to do something worthwhile, and wound up landing on a couple of partners who were good at it. Is the short answer. And we, as
Right.
you know, Pat, because you were involved in the formation of this and in the attempt to make it sustainable. I mean, we even started our own nonprofit and ran it for some number of years to
Hmm.
put Lemons Mechanic, people who know want to fix cars, know how to fix cars, have tools to fix cars. Put them together with people who need a car and don't have the money to fix their car, so they can't get to work and they can't get their kids to school. And that seemed like a pretty no-brainer kind of thing to put together. And as you know, Pat, ultimately just not an insurable nonprofit. So that was really a disappointment that we couldn't figure out how to make that, last longer than it did.
Yeah, it's
Interesting.
amazing. Yeah, you can have an idea where people will do the work for free for people who need the work to have done, and
Yeah,
yet, which just seems like such a no-brainer. Hey, this is a great idea, and then accept that what happens when this woman gets her brakes done on her car, and then her brakes fail, and she plows into the median, and
or a school bus full of children. Let's be clear. It's not an unreasonable question. Let's be
yeah,
very clear. I understand where the insurance companies are coming from there,
right,
Mm.
yeah,
but you would
it's
think that
it's
they could figure out how to price it.
yeah. Well, I think they could figure out how to price it, and it's give us all your money, and then
Yeah,
we'll still say no.
yeah, yeah.
Also, if you make a claim, we're going to deny it.
Right. But I mean, they're going to do that anyway. So
Yeah, exactly. Um, so we're coming up on rapidly coming up on the 20th anniversary of the 24 Hours of Lemons, which
Wow.
I know I never thought I'd. I
yeah,
mean, like I said, my origin story is I told my brother we need to do this before somebody goes to jail and this whole thing disappears, right? In 2008. And yet here we are quite a ways later.
yeah, just unfathomable.
So,
I mean,
what plans, if any, are there for a blowout celebration?
we're just starting to talk about that. And when I say we, I mean Eric Root is the only one smart enough
Yeah.
amongst all of us to sort of look at a calendar and go, hey, wait a minute, guys, this is going to happen. Um, we do not know yet. Certainly, we need to do something. I think for the 5 year and the 10 year, we had big parties. Um, for the Sweet 16th, we had sort of a series around at different races around that time. I don't know what we're going to do. I mean, you guys tell me what should we do
Well, I think it
besides
needs to be
free entry for everyone.
yeah, no. I think we need to have a real blowout in Las Vegas, like with the dancing girls with the feathered things as we walk through, and I think that would be a very entertaining. Mary would certainly love to have it in a prom style atmosphere because you
I was
know
going to
how
say the
Mary
Dancing
loves that.
Girls and the Feathers isn't really on brand. I mean, can we get like Soggy
Yeah.
in feathers? Would that be okay?
Well, that is on brand. I'll give you
Yeah,
that.
Bob and feathers. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
although I don't know. Las Vegas is maybe too highfalutin for us. Like maybe it's Reno or Laughlin.
Yeah.
Can we
So
somehow
Texas
recreate the original like parking lot F1 track? Like
the
oh yeah,
Caesar's
Caesar.
Palace F1. I mean, I would love to do a Vegas race, and there are sort of structural issues with the available facilities. But yeah, I even thought early on because the guy who the original John Pagel was Dan Radowitz, and in running CSRG's operations, he had been part of when CSRG did vintage races in, I don't know if it was the Caesars parking lot, but it was some parking lot in Reno. And we talked relatively seriously about, do we want to get into the business of making our own tracks? And the answer very quickly, very obviously, was absolutely not. But it's a little compelling. And Vegas as a concept is very on brand. But yeah, I agree. It's gotten quite a bit higher falutin than what we really want. So yeah, it's probably like Terrible's Casino in Laughlin or something like that, where you'd have to do
Didn't we
it.
used to have a race in Reno?
Yeah, we did. We had Reno Fernley, and I mean that was as lemons appropriate as you can possibly imagine. That was the track where they had wild horses. They neglected to mention that at night wild horses came and like grazed on the racetrack, and they just didn't mention that when we like say, hey, let's do a 24. Sounds good. Let's do a full 24. It just didn't occur to them. Horses on the track might be a problem. Uh, that place was something else. It was the closest I've ever been to just some Mad Max shit out there. It was I mean they were super nice, but it was the methiest kind of the 24-hour race. Again, it turns out they didn't have enough corner workers. We didn't know this. And their solution
Oh
at the
yeah.
11th hour is they went to the local Air Force base and just started handing out like hundreds. Hey, come make $100. Come wave a flag. Like, who does that? Um, yeah, we used to do it there. Unfortunately, it wasn't close enough to any real casino-y part of the state.
Uh,
There was one good taco restaurant. That was about the only thing in town.
hmm. We need to ponder on this a little bit. We can
Yeah.
Matt Murphy, you want to throw out some contact info if our listeners have ideas for the 20th year Lemons Blowout. We can forward those along to Mr. Lamb.
Oh yeah, dear listener, you could hit me up at matt@racershq.com or find me in the DMs. Most of you just find me in the DMs or my text messaging, but yeah, matt@racershq.com or Instagram or Facebook, TikTok, whatever.
We'll get this figured out for you, Jay. I will get in touch with Mr. Rude, who's to his whatever the opposite of credit is, still answers my texts when I text him most of the
I
time.
believe
You
I
did
believe the word you're looking for is great shame.
Yes, great shame. Still responds to my texts most of the time.
YouTube influencer battle, like maybe do like a boxing match on Saturday night of YouTube influencers.
Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea.
Maybe Kino for grid spaces.
Well, all I would say is if anybody has a solution for a Vegas track that we don't know about yet, or a Reno track that we don't know about, let me know. tell Matt. Matt will pass it on to me.
Hmm.
Yeah, 20th thing we got to work on. Um, yeah, what I'd really like to do, honestly, is can we come up with like a race weekend that has all of the features of a typical race weekend except the race? Because that would be so much more fun for me. So if you can think of that, I mean, what does it look? Is it like a train trip? What do you do to get
Well,
everything but
Jay,
the race?
you may recall series of recent conversations when I tried to convince you to attend the 24 hours of Le Mans with me and the group that's going next summer. And frankly, most of that experience is not about the race. So
Hmm.
you still have the opportunity to go back on your decision.
I don't know. Is that going to involve Soggy and Mary in prom outfits? I don't think so.
Oh, it certainly could.
Well, all right.
Mary would, if you make that a condition, Mary will make that happen.
I might have to reconsider that then.
Might have to consider.
Uh,
Excellent. All right. Well, we're getting down to the end of the podcast here, but this is our. Oh, Murphy, you got something?
yeah, Jay, I'm real curious. I mean, this thing seems to be humming along. You're doing great. Like, I love how you're bringing on. I think you've started to work with drifters and podcasters, things like that, to try to bring in new folks, right? But I really am curious, like, what the next like 3 to 5 year, like, what's that next adjustment? Is it Mexico? Is it Canada? Is it is there some expansion, or is it an expansion of audience? Like, what's your vision there?
Well, I think we learned a long time ago, and this is very unlike other things that I work on. I think we learned a long time ago that the less we can muck around with this, the better for everybody. I mean, it's our job to
Hmm.
deal with safety, and it's our job to deal with the behind the scenes ops so that when the gate is open, things happen the way they're supposed to happen. And other than that, I think there are some things in the world that the more you try to control them and the more you try to own the experience and craft the direction, you're just more likely to screw it up for everybody than to make anything better. And I think
Hmm.
this is really one of them. I think we learned a long time ago that the people who are into this, they know what they like. They kind of know how to police their own. They know how to keep the mood the way that it ought to be. They know how to keep the field the way that it ought to be. They know how to interact with each other the right way so that nobody's getting bullied, but still interesting things are happening. I just don't see how we, from the top down, could insert ourselves in that and not screw it up. So I think our job is to make sure that people are safe and make sure that nobody's trying to step on anybody else's head, and beyond that, just to get the hell out of the way. So amazingly, and again, this thing has really marched along very happily and I think successfully, and it's made a lot of people have a lot of good times because I have had no illusions that I know what's going on or can control it. Unlike most of the other things that I screw around with, where I do have the illusions that it's my job to control it and direct it, and they don't run nearly as smoothly, frankly. So, the short answer is we really don't have a plan or a strategy, and we're just trying not to screw it up. We're just trying to stay the hell out of the way.
No,
Just keep the plates spinning.
that's interesting.
Yeah, keep the plate spinning exactly. And occasionally one falls down, but that's better than all of them.
Mhm.
That's kind of my philosophy.
I, Another quick question. You were talking about red flags a minute ago, and I wonder, like, are you on the call tree when red flags happen? Like, let's say you're not at a race, or do you get a
Not
summary,
unless
or
No, not unless there's something substantive that happens, which thank
gotcha.
heavens is incredibly rare. But I mean, I have gotten calls. We've had in 18 years. I mean, we've had two or three air transports, and those
Mhm.
have all turned out to be non-issues. I mean, those have always turned out to be guy in tower called helicopter before anybody had gotten to car kinds of things.
Mhm.
Thank goodness. Um, but that certainly merits that's a call tree question,
Mhm.
obviously. Um, anytime there's something that is really out of the ordinary, even if it's not a safety issue. There's a bit of culture, but honestly, we have so much experience and such attentive people, and Kim and Eric and Nick and the people, now Rich, there's some new bodies in there, and John. The people who really are on the ground now have done it so long, and they've been around for so long because they're good at it and they know what they're doing. There is really nothing on the ground that I know how to do better than those people. There just isn't. And if a call comes to me, it's as a courtesy of, hey, there's this thing that we think you should know about, not, hey, we need the guidance from the oracle. I mean, the people who are on the ground are so much smarter and better at it than I am that I'm really just an observer, which honestly, I think I will take credit. I think that means I've done a good job.
Mhm.
If I were required to still do something necessary, I would have made a. That means I made a mistake long ago and didn't set the right thing in place long ago. So I'm very happy to be utterly superfluous at this point.
When it's like, Jay, when you get the call from American Express to pre-authorize $25,000 on a helicopter, we need you to just go ahead and do that, okay? I'll fill
Yeah,
you in later.
yeah, yeah. That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Um, I was just having a conversation with somebody today, and she was saying, when I was in a finance course in college, the professor said, if you're going to embezzle, make sure to embezzle a lot. Don't
Right.
embezzle a little.
Right.
Excuse me. Well, Jay, you do mention get into the topic of safety a little bit, and I hadn't really intended to talk about it a whole lot, but um, I keep my ear to the pretty close to the ground on that topic, and
Yeah.
across a fairly as wide an array of information as I can find on that, and um, I think it's a lot of credit to you and to your whole operation that Lemons is really looked at from a amateur racing standpoint as really being on top of it safety wise. That you're not going to get a car in and through Lemons, um, through tech that's not going to be safe. And to a lot of people that is sort of counterintuitive. With well, these guys are, at least reputationally, these are all claptrap cars. They're running Gremlins and Fairmonts and things that the rocker panels are about to fall out because they're rusted through from salt. How can they be so? That can't be safe. But I think the record speaks for itself. It's really
Mhm.
incredible.
Mhm.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I'd say two things about that. One, I would say that, yeah, from the outside looking in, if you don't think about it at all, then sure, that seems counterintuitive. But if you think about it at all, then the less experienced the drivers and the less purpose built the cars, the more rigid the safety has to be, not
Right.
less.
Right.
And that once you realize that, you say, oh, well, yeah, of course, this has to be more aggressive than the norm, not less aggressive than the norm, safety wise. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I appreciate that, and I think so far, statistically, we can look back and say, well, that's great. I'm glad we've logged, way more miles than any other series, and we've really had way less safety heartburn than anybody, well, that I know of. But I also think it's very important to never forget these are even in very unsafe series, these are exceedingly low frequency,
Right.
high cost events. And so if you were to rack up all the total race miles in Lemons, I'm not sure you even get on the freeway to, what the average injury rate would be. If it were
Yeah.
one car doing that many miles, are we even statistically there? Which is to say, I don't know that the fact we've got this so far up to right this minute good record is meaningful. I don't know that it's statistically meaningful. I think you just every day, for the reason that we all on the lemon side want to be able to sleep at night, which it was
Right.
very clear after that first race that if we couldn't come to terms with the safety aspect of it, nobody would sleep at night and you would be miserable, and that wasn't a life worth living. Um,
Right.
I think every day you have to accept that you don't really know if you're doing a good job or not. And you have to ask if you're doing the best job you can do in the confines of what this is. Um, but I would never say that, hey, look, this is proof that we're doing a good job, because I don't know that there's enough miles to say that.
Hmm. What were the, it may be using the term very loosely, what were the safety requirements for the first race at Altamont?
The what now? The safety requirements. So we at the first race, and I mean everybody should know, I had no background in this at all. I mean, I'd been around racetracks obviously from my career and stuff like that, but I had no background in event management and none at all in series management. Zero. So the very first race, we rented the track at Altamont, and foolishly, in retrospect, sort of unbelievably, but who knew? I just trusted the rental manager at Altamont when he said, "Oh, you don't need, like, just like a 4-point roll cage is fine. You don't need anything more." Like, I just thought, well, this guy's a professional. He knows, and the insurance, and he's providing the insurance, which he turned out not to be providing. We learned later, but that's also another story. And I just said, okay, well, that's fine. I mean, he knows what he's talking about. I don't need to worry about it anymore. And of course, as soon as the green flag dropped, and I saw what was going on out there, I thought, oh boy, like that was a mistake I never want to make again. And we got out of that first event, fortunately, with no heartburn. But that was a real eye opener, that a 4-point cage. I mean, there were people driving around in open face helmets and t-shirts, because at Altamont, that's what they did. And they just thought
Yeah.
it was fine. And later you learn, well, yeah, there's a fucking helicopter pad at Altamont because they're using it all the time.
Mhm.
That's no way to run a business. Um, but being judgment proof does not absolve you from your responsibility to your fellow man. But it just didn't occur to me that this was the situation.
How
So
many
we
cars did you have there at that race?
33,
Okay.
33. Yeah, and I was, so for the first 5 years or so of this series, I was still building cars and trying to run teams and stuff. And
Oh,
as you guys both know, well, yeah, you don't want to do that if you're not really compelled to, because that's a pain in the butt. But so in that first race, I was running a Celica, and I could see from inside the car, like, oh boy, t-shirts and open face helmets. That is not sufficient to the needs of what you're doing here. Because I was getting T-boned and T-boning quite inadvertently. Every hour you were T-boning somebody in that deal. So yeah, we didn't know. We had no idea what we didn't know, and it was a real wake up call. But as in any other thing that you do, you're never going to know everything, obviously, and
Right.
obviously the stakes in this one for what you don't know are really high. But you just have to start somewhere and then try to catch up as fast as you can before somebody pays the price for what you don't know. And that's still true today. I mean, there are things that we don't know that I wish we knew now, and we're
Right.
still learning some of those things. So it's just the way that looks, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, it's knock on wood. You may be right that we're not statistically significant, but the people who have walked away from, and their families who've walked away from what would otherwise be pretty serious incidents, don't care about any
Yeah,
statistical significance beyond a one of one event, right?
mhm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so to maybe bring things up a little bit here before we end it, and not end it on a statistical note. One of my thank you, Matt Murphy. We're all hands on head again. Mirror, is this a power pose? I haven't listened to that TED talk. I don't know if this is a
Well,
power pose.
I'm the only one actually leaning back in his chair, so that's all.
Oh, that's true. That's the real power pose, right? Now Matt
There you
Murphy
go.
is too.
There you go, Matt.
Okay. So, one of my kind of pet peeves is that every year at this time of year, you get a absolute onslaught of pre-written, nearly brainless listicles of the top 10. Fill in your thing. New drink of the year, book of the year, movie of the year, song of the year. whatever. So
Jazz album.
I've got a list. There you go. I've got our listicle for lemons, and these are some year-end lemons awards. So thinking of 2023 only, what was the best? And you may want to limit this only to the limited events that you went to, but you could expand it if you chose to.
I was going to
What
say,
would be your
you've been
best?
to more races this year than I have, Pat. I mean, you should just be asking yourself these questions.
Maybe barely. I don't know that that's true. I was going to say, what's your best event of the year this year?
Best event of the year. Well, since I only went to about 4, I will have to say it was one of the ones I didn't go to. I'm going to say that was Pit Race, where for the first time we had just spectacular weather. Usually you get some sleet, some sunshine, some rain, some wind. I believe it was Pit Race. We had spectacular weather. I'll take that.
All right. I will open this to all time. What is your favorite entrant car of all time?
Uh, Boy, that's well, that has to be the bed.
I think you'll need to explain that a little bit more
Okay,
for our
thank you. I was
listeners.
giving you an opening there. So for 10 years, Nick had been every time anybody asked Nick, like, I need a theme. What should my theme be? Nick would say, the bed. And they'd say, oh, what the hell does that mean? He'd say, take your car, I don't care what it is, cut the roof off, make it into a king size bed. Dust ruffle, pillows, driver's helmet is coming right up, behind the headboard. And people just like, okay, I'm gonna leave you alone now. I'm gonna stop bothering you. Well, about
He's clearly
uh,
having an episode.
yeah, exactly. About 5 years ago, Spank Spangler showed up with the bed at Sonoma. Yeah, the greatest thing. So the bed.
And that is a Spank special all the way right
Yeah,
there.
totally.
Yeah. So maybe except from the bed, since we've
Mm.
already discussed that as a favorite car, what would be your favorite theme over the years?
Uh, Favorite theme. Um, well, it just changes all the time, doesn't it? I don't know. I mean, if you asked me this question 30 minutes ago, it'd be different than 30 minutes into the future.
Sure.
I I really, looking back, I really enjoyed the Bipolar Express only because these guys built a 800-pound steam locomotive onto the roof of their car and realized very quickly, like, oh, you know what? That was not good for handling, but we like it, so we're just going to do that for like 5 years in a row. So I give them a lot of credit for that, for the effort and for just the stick to itiveness. I really liked that the team that built air stairs onto their Honda Civic. They were on the East Coast, and and then just were in airport employee garb for the whole race. I mean, that was good, but you can't even pick one out. I mean, there's just too many good ones. Every time you go, there's 4 or 5 really good themes that show up. The Bill Cosby Jello pudding and sleeping pills theme was pretty good. I mean, we need a longer podcast. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
The trademark irreverence of Lemon's themes, right?
Yeah. I mean, you would just be excluding too many people to go on any longer.
Yeah.
Anything that's above the base level of Viagra is racing is like Viagra, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's a few. Well, I was about to say like we don't need any more Smokey and the Bandit or anything like that, but then I don't know. There was just this. I wasn't at this race, but I was doing the wrap up filming with Eric maybe, and there was a team. I think they had a Nissan, whatever it was. I don't even remember what the hell the car was, but they figured out that if you put a Pontiac J2000 nose onto the car and spray painted everything black, it looked like a miniature Trans Am. I mean, so they made a Smokey and the Bandit car out of it. I mean, that's pretty good. So even the ones that you want to poo poo, the pink pig, yeah, yawn, big deal. yeah, people keep coming up with good spins on them.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So then my final one is your other than Sonoma, because I know you're a big fan of Sonoma because of I Can Sleep at Home. What's
Yeah.
your favorite venue otherwise?
Favorite venue otherwise? I mean, Barber is great. Um,
Mhm.
uh, you know what? Actually, I'll tell you what. I was very skeptical about Road America. We went to Road America a couple of times long ago, a decade ago.
Yep.
And it was problematic in a bunch of ways, not least because of just the management infrastructure and the staffing infrastructure that we had to deal with. It was sort of a pain in the ass. And I was very skeptical about going back there. Kim Harmon really lobbied hard for us to reconsider it. They had reached out to us repeatedly and assured us that, there had been management change and maybe an ownership change. And, things are really different. They got their house in order. Because I trust Kim and I certainly don't want her to feel that I'm kind of managing her sphere. She's really taken a lot of control and done a great job of where we go and that sort of stuff. I said, sure, we'll give him another shot. And I went to that race. That was a fantastic race. That was a fantastic event with a fantastic supporting staff. They really knew what they were doing. The facility was incredibly well put together. The town is super well put together. That is a great place to do an endurance race. I mean, it's about as good as you can get. So I gotta say, Road America right now is right at the top of my list.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Murphy's heard me talk about that way too much, but that was a fun time.
That's an amazing place.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things, I don't know if you and I probably talked about this, but I was really impressed with at Road America the things that they do as a facility to monetize their facility
Yeah, yeah,
that you don't see other tracks doing. Murphy, when we were
yeah,
there, they were running at the same, so that was right around Halloween, right? It was before Halloween. It was right.
yeah,
And so they
yeah,
were running like some sort of, Halloween monster scary carnival kind of thing with rides and zombies and paintball and all sorts of stuff. And they had concerts. I think the week after we were there, they were having like the Wisconsin Frisbee Golf Association state championship or something. I mean, it
yeah,
was
yeah.
it,
Well, and it goes to show what Nick Hahn has always said, which is if you're I mean, he says the converse. If you're bad at one thing, you're bad at everything. He observed long ago that the same teams that couldn't figure out how to sign up when they get to the track, they can't figure out how to put tires on their car. They can't figure out how to get their guy to remember his wristband. If you're bad at one thing, you're bad at everything, and that's totally true. And the converse is also true, which is if you're good at something, you're probably good at everything. And I think, yeah, Road America really showed this year they're good at their operations, they're good at training their people, they're good at figuring out traffic flow. I mean, these little things are good at where
yeah,
do you stage rescue vehicles. And that means they're also good at, hey guys, duh, we're paying whatever it costs to run this facility. How about let's monetize that empty piece of grass over there that's 15 acres that we're paying for that? Like, let's figure out some way for that to defray its cost. Well, every facility should do that. But if you haven't even figured out how to get someone to take a ticket at the gate yet, then you're not going to figure out how to put a scary Halloween carnival out by turn 9. So
yeah,
it really does show that and this is just basic. This is basic business ops. It really does show that if you're good at the kind of things that we do care about, you're probably also good at these other things that we don't really care about, but it just shows that they're professional. They think about it,
yeah,
they're smart, they know how to execute. It's a good sign.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Good stuff, Maury.
Good
Thank,
stuff,
th-
Jay Lamm.
thanks for asking the hard hitting questions tonight.
Well, I told Jay I was going to come at him like, Dan Rather with, hard hitting, low ball, gotcha kind of questions. But I decided, that's not really in the spirit of the season. We'll save that for Valentine's Day.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, yeah, my cursor isn't even hovering over the hang up button anymore.
Oh,
Whoops, we lost Jay.
Yeah.
hmm.
Yeah.
Fair
Yeah, that
enough.
was fun.
Awesome.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, no,
Well,
thank
thanks
you
for
so
coming
much
on,
for coming
Jay.
on. Yeah, yeah, you're our biggest star yet by far. So,
Oh
thank
my
you so
God,
much.
that's
Yeah,
sad.
very,
That's so
yeah.
depressing.
Well, I
Well,
No,
mean,
you're gonna
no.
have to
there's
tell me that.
except for Neil and Jill and maybe Troy.
Yeah, Jay,
Probably
do you
not.
think
Definitely Neil and Jill.
Jay, do you think nonprofit professionals should be paid for their work?
Wait, nonprofit what?
Do you think
Professional
nonprofit
host?
workers, no, nonprofit workers, like let's say an executive at a nonprofit, do you think they should be paid for their work?
100%. 100%.
Like a living salary?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask what brings this question up. Pat is basically losing it over here. What is the context for this question? Because of course, I have very strong feelings about this. I think that a person who can run nonprofits are really hard. I mean, having run them, having been
Yeah.
involved with them for years and years, it's an incredibly hard thing to do.
Mhm.
And um, someone who can run a difficult organization like that, I mean, that's like a tennis pro or a baseball pitcher. It's a very, very specific talent set. And the people who are good at it can make the organization much more successful than the people who are bad at it. In fact, people who are bad at it can make the organization fail.
Mhm.
So I just don't think it's obviously there's a reasonableness test to all of these things, but that's true in the for profit world as well, for the most part.
Yeah.
I just don't think there's any excuse for, hey, we're going to hamstring this organization, which is supposed to be doing good in the world, because we don't want to pay this person who could help it be successful. And we don't want to pay them less than they would help it bring in by their own skill.
Mhm.
I have very strong opinions about that. Pat, perhaps you disagree?
No, I don't disagree at all. Murphy was clowning you a little bit, Jay, without you knowing it, because we had one guest infer, or perhaps outright state, that maybe nonprofit executives were overpaid for what is otherwise not really an exceptional salary. But
Yeah, yeah. I can't
Uh,
imagine who they'd be referring to.
yeah,
yeah. Um, Jay, let's start to wrap this thing up. It has been a glorious podcast, but do you have any shout outs? Like use this time on our platform of hundred of billions of listeners.
Well, honestly, I don't really have any shout outs beyond all of the crew, and you guys know them all, who are actually going to races and making races happen. Um, and we've, talked about those people so far. Um, all I really can say is, ever since drinking that whiskey at the top of this podcast, I've just had to pee desperately. So I'm
Mm.
just ready for you guys to call it any minute now.
Okay, well, one
well, it
last
is
question then.
an endurance podcast, Jay.
Then real
That's
quick,
fair.
and
That's
maybe
fair.
maybe you're already here, but what's your get hype song? Like
Oh yeah,
what are you listening to when you're trying to go to the track or solve a business problem?
Ah,
Welcome to the jungle. Something like that.
you mean what's my walk up song?
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Maybe Shark.
Baby Shark. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
Baby
We'll
Shark.
accept that. All right, we're
yeah.
gonna rapidly wrap this so you can use the restroom. I like this. Mulry, what you got?
Jay, thanks so much for not even flinching when I asked, at least not in text form, if you would come on the pod with us. Really appreciate
I'm
your
delighted.
participation tonight and your friendship. This has just been, Lemons has been so meaningful for me and for Murphy and for all of our folks and lots of other folks. So, but
Yeah.
for the
Thank
pod,
you.
thank you very
And
much.
likewise. And likewise. I mean, I feel like a lot of good things have come out of this project. And, knowing you is absolutely one of them. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you,
Nice.
and that's good for 10% off your next monthly bill.
I like this.
Only 10? All right.
Well, I mean, we're
Thanks,
still running a
guys.
business,
Yeah.
Fair enough. I
Yeah.
can respect that. I know what that looks like. Does that mean I can disconnect and pee now? Is that what that means?
That's fine. Go ahead, Jay. We love you,
Absolutely.
brother. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you,
Thanks, Jay.
guys. I'll
Uh,
talk to you.
guys, like and subscribe, rate and review. It's been an awesome year. This is our last pod of the year, so we'll catch you in January with I'm sure some more amazing content. But thanks to all
Hope
the
so.
listeners for listening over the last year and a half as we revitalize this thing, and now we get to add Baby Shark to the
hype list.
Get Hype
God bless.
playlist. Man, really leaving a
All
mark.
right. Well,
there.
happy holidays and happy New Year to everyone. We'll catch you in 2024.
Yeah. See you guys at the track. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.